Before we begin proper, I would like to apologize for using this automated voice for the video. As previously mentioned during my update video, coronavirus has precluded recording properly, most notably when it comes to commentary due to people other than myself being stuck in the house when I would be using the privacy and silence to record videos. Because of that complication, I will be utilizing this technique for upcoming videos I want to throw together, but cannot properly record. It's very possible that I'll come back to these videos, and redo the commentary when the opportunity presents itself, but in the meantime I hope those watching can be understanding, and will continue to support the channel during these troubled times. There are still some standard gameplay videos upcoming that were recorded prior to the problems, and I'll try to record more in the meantime if at all possible, but in the meantime I hope you'll find some entertainment in what I'm able to produce utilizing text-to-speech software. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the video. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pokemon Shield, where today I'll be doing something a little bit different. This is an idea that may become a longer running series depending on how it goes. To summarize, I've had the idea for a while of conducting generic discussions or countdowns about particular games while pre-recorded footage of said gameplays in the background for you to watch while I talk. This will allow me to discuss subjects in a more casual fashion without being distracted by the game itself, while also allowing me to play the game with proper concentration. I'd much rather this kind of video not be scripted, but seeing as the aforementioned circumstances are requiring that I input the dialogue into text-to-speech software, I hope the inclusion of a script doesn't make this idea too weird. However, they're also much easier to produce than Let's Plays now that I can't record properly, so hopefully this will help bridge the gap a bit while gauging interest for more properly recorded videos of this nature in the future. All that said, today I'd like to discuss a few ideas I've had for patches that I'd like to see in Sword and Shield. For the most part these are incredible entries in the Pokemon franchise, and I love them every bit as previous titles. Sure, the Pokédex is smaller than usual, but with 400 Pokemon available anyway that's hardly a strike against it, especially since they'll be releasing expansions to expand that roster. There's still more than enough characters available to use without having nearly 1,000 total, so while there are some favorites of mine currently missing, there's more than enough to make up for that. But I'm getting off on an unrelated tangent, although I have considered throwing together a countdown video of my favorite and least favorite aspects of the game, so further discussion of the roster will belong there. Today I wanted to discuss a few quirks that I find far more irksome, and I believe deserve a proper fix. First and foremost, the forced experience share is inexcusable. Its inclusion makes it almost impossible to not be overleveled, as evidenced by myself winding up accidentally overpowered throughout the entire game despite being one who actively goes out of my way to not grind in games. Not to mention it strips away half the fun of a Pokemon game, which is watching your Pokemon grow through their experiences, and the immersion you gain from doing so. Instead what you have is a circumstance in which most of your team sits on your belt while you're trying to get the one or two stragglers caught up, which takes most of the game because those you're not using keep pulling back ahead. There's no satisfaction from raising your Pokemon this way, and you as a player don't get the opportunity to enjoy raising them, and experiencing an adventure alongside them. Heck, prior to the halfway point, I only used my starter a handful of times when I had no other choice, because otherwise it was always at a higher level than everything else, so the experience gain needed to focus on others instead. That's not fun, especially when the starter should be the one you're creating the most memories with, not some random thing you caught that you spend 5 straight hours using exclusively because it was several levels behind the rest of your party when you caught it. If you want to have the player start with the experience share then that's fine, but for crying out loud either make it an item they can deactivate, or go the route of the patch I propose here, which is make it an option in the menu the player can toggle. This would be an easy patch that would make the story mode infinitely better, and an adventure actually worth revisiting someday. Sorry if I went on a bit of a rant there, but that was a design choice I just couldn't excuse, especially when giving the player a choice is so easy to do. I tolerated it in the Let's Go games because those titles were specifically going for a more casual experience, but Sword and Shield were no harder than those because that feature remained. The other patches I'd like to see are less rambly, and more focused around post-game content, namely the wild area. For starters, it would be much appreciated if the beams of light rising from active Pokemon dens were made more visible through harsh weather. I have nothing against the shifting weather mechanic of the area, but having sandstorms or thick fog conceal the locations of active dens in the distance is bad game design. It's needlessly hostile to the player, adding only frustration as you need to ride to an entirely different area just to scope out where you need to head next, while adding nothing to the gameplay in exchange for that inconvenience aside from wasted time. Especially if multiple adjacent areas are all suffering from harsh conditions with low visibility, you end up running around like a mouse in a maze trying to find a vantage from where you can spot the active dens, or can wind up turned around if seeking a den in the middle of a storm if you don't know the lay of the land very well. Hunting for certain Pokemon is time-consuming enough as is without this nonsense, so I deeply appreciate a patch that makes the light beams visible through the harsh weather, or one that simply makes the harsh weather less generally obstructive to your vision. Next up would be a patch that allows retreating from max raid battles when there are no other human players in the match. I fully understand why you can't retreat when playing with other people, because it would leave a gap in their roster, and would just be a dick move. Kind of like the time I was playing with somebody who was using a Mewtwo, and all he did was actively attack the other players instead of focusing on the Dynamax opponent in front of us, but that's another story. However, when no other people are involved, and I'm battling exclusively alongside computer companions, I don't see why I can't be allowed to retreat when I know I'm not going to win, rather than need to waste time sitting there in a hopeless battle, especially since even to lose a max raid battle can take a few minutes to wrap up. Minutes which only agitate the player when they know that victory is impossible under the circumstances. This might be a complicated thing to patch without resulting in glitches jerks may exploit to screw over others, but nonetheless it's a feature that would take some of the annoyance out of a process that can already be ridiculously tedious. This next entry is less of a patch, but would still be appreciated similarly, and that's to have an extended time limit in 6v6 online battles, at least as an alternative option in the rule settings. 20 minutes is fine if only using 3 Pokemon, but when each side is using 6, I frequently find the time limit expiring, or players actively abusing the time limit's expiration to steal a victory by decision when it's running low. Just increasing it by 5 or 10 minutes would suffice far better for most bouts, and would make matches far less likely to end because of time expiration, which I find happening in the majority of my battles, which is neither a satisfying way to win nor lose. I understand the necessity for a time limit, but the limit as it stands is way too short for full battles without disrupting their flow, while giving players a feature they can too easily exploit. Lastly, I have a proposal that's more of an added feature than a patch, that being the ability to save battle replays. This was in previous Pokemon games, and I can't imagine much reason to have removed this feature unless Game Freak just assumed nobody was using it in the first place. Especially now that the Switch, unlike the 3DS, actually has stronger sharing capabilities that people may want to apply to their favorite matches for showing strangers online. At present though, the only way to accomplish this is to use a separate recording device as I did here, which while functional, makes the battles less watchable because the viewer is forced to wait for decisions to be made, as opposed to just showing the action like replays in other recent Pokemon games allowed. This is a feature I'd love to see them bring back in one of the upcoming expansions. That pretty much wraps up my patch suggestions. I may have had some other ideas at one point or another, but they've since slipped my mind, so maybe I'll return to this topic at a later date, but for now this is all I have. I know it's not much, but some of these were matters regarding the game that I wanted to discuss nonetheless, and didn't think they would fit properly into other Pokemon subjects I'd like to talk about in the future. That said, however, I noticed in editing that the commentary's length came up a bit short, so I'd like to take a moment to double back on something I mentioned earlier. Near the beginning of this video, I brought up how they'll soon be expanding the Pokemon roster with expansion packs. This is an incredible step forward for the series, yet to my understanding a lot of people are strangely upset about this, which doesn't make any sense. When you look back at the history of the Pokemon franchise, what is a constant they've stuck to almost every generation? A theme that may be the biggest money-grubbing sin the franchise has been committing since the beginning? Special edition games. Slightly altered versions of the same game you already paid for with some slight changes and added areas or story elements. That's exactly what they're doing now, but for cheaper. Think about it. Would you rather they release $30 downloadable content? Or a $60 game that would be the exact same thing, but for the privilege of paying twice as much money so you can be required to play through the entire game again, and go through the trouble of transferring over all your Pokemon to the new game? Game Freak is simply taking full advantage of the opportunity to utilize DLC, taking the path that not only allows some of the content to be released to us sooner by releasing the expansions in waves, but also allows the consumers to save time and money as opposed to the alternative that they would have obviously done had DLC not been a reasonable option. I can't comprehend why people are upset about this, but maybe somebody in the comments can enlighten me as to how saving us time and money is a bad thing. Anyway, that is all for now. For the time being, these types of videos are mostly experimental, especially since I believe they'd work far better if I could actually be talking about the matters instead of typing them. If you'd like to see more of these kinds of videos, either recorded like this or done more properly with me actually commentating them, then let me know in the comments, as well as give the video a like so I know viewers want more, and also be sure to subscribe for future content. Be sure to check out some of my other videos in the meantime until the next can be released, and enjoy the rest of this Pokemon battle. I know I'm far from a pro at this game, but what matters most to me is using strategies I find fun to employ with Pokemon I love. If doing so winds up being effective, then that's just a bonus. Regardless of whether or not you stick around until the end of this video, thank you for watching.